No.
Hi, this is Rich Olson from UK Business Advisors. I'm here today with Elliot Harris, and we are talking about risk for business. This is the third in our webinar series, the third and last in our webinar series for this time being. And over to you, Elliot.
Thanks, Rich. We talked in the previous one about the 5 areas of risk: governance, finance, operational, and external. This one, I want to talk a little bit about compliance with law and regulation. Now, one of the problems is that as a business owner, you are expected to know the law and regulation. As ridiculous as that might seem, because there is so much law and regulation that it is impossible for an individual to know everything. So the trick is, how do you manage that compliance? And let's just take the areas where things can go wrong. Responsibilities as an employer. Employment law, equal rights, tax law. Many is the tribunal that business owners find themselves in because they failed to manage their employment issues correctly. Equal rights is an increasing issue within business. And tax law, even something as simple as operating PAYE correctly, can get you into trouble. What about the particular regulatory requirements of certain activities within your business? And the great one, of course, is operating vehicles, particularly if you are using van drivers, lorry drivers. You know, are you have you got the right systems and processes to manage mileage, manage time on the road, all that sort of area? And of course, the areas such as company law, partnership law. Now, the trick here is very much about knowing where to turn for this information. So, for example, employment law, if you've got really robust HR procedures, then this shouldn't be an area which would cause you problems. And by HR procedures, I'm talking about things like staff handbook, or at the very least, effective contracts of employment, service contracts, etc. And again, a good dose of common sense in this is important. Now, they say the law is an ass, and it may well be in certain areas, but in these areas, if you get the right advice, you're less likely to get it wrong. Operating vehicles, it's not an area that I have a great fund of knowledge about, but nevertheless, that is an area of regulation. When you're dealing with things like dealing with waste materials, are you obeying the right regulation for the disposal of those waste materials? Now, that's something, if you are involved in this, you need to get the right information. And if you can't access it yourself, you need to take advice from those who can. Company law, if you're a limited company. Partnership law, if you're a partnership. And any other law that impacts on the business that you are operating. For example, you might be a trading company operating alongside a charity. So you need to make sure the charity law is covered. So it's important that if you're a company, you have not only the right constitution, and a constitution that was written 20 years ago when you formed your company may not be adequate for your current needs. Likewise, a partnership deed, is it fit for purpose? Have you got, for example, the right retirement clauses within the contract? do they adhere to current legislation? Making sure you've got that right. So you need good advice when it comes to putting your constitution together. Now, look, it is impossible, as I said right at the beginning, for you to know everything about this area. But if you've got good access to HR advice, good access to legal advice, good access to specialist advice in respect of things like operating vehicles, etc., you are less likely to go amiss because you've taken that advice. When you don't listen to that advice, that's when you are more likely to get yourself into trouble.
So that's sorry, Elliot, doesn't it also come down to a lot of this is also down to training of managers and employees to a certain regard?
It is in the area of operation, most certainly. It is, again, it's what they need to do their job properly.
Yeah.
And I would emphasize what they need to do their job. If you're expanding the job, so it's going into other areas, they need the right training to do that. So if you've got somebody, who's operating on a part-time basis as your HR person, you've got to make sure that they've got the right skills to do the job. If they haven't, you need to buy those skills in.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, you have a very valid point about operating vehicles. That is very heavily regulated, especially when it comes to lorry drivers, etc. How long they can drive for, how much rest they must have, etc., etc. And policing that is an important, very fundamental part. Actually, it reminds me of our first webinar we did was actually when you start talking about company law and actually. You talked about articles of association. Actually, one of the things we didn't really talk about was shareholders agreements because they're massively important as well. But
absolutely vital.
Yeah, for the same reason you mentioned about retirement of partners, but there's retirement of shareholders. You know, death of a shareholder, the impact on the company, shareholder director.
And indeed, one thing we didn't actually talk about was business continuity.
Yeah.
The fact is that however immortal you may feel yourself to be, you as a business owner and a business manager know that at some stage you will not be there. So what steps have you taken to mitigate the risk of damage to the business for your departure?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
I think I just want to say one other thing, Rich. It is that a lot of what I've said over these three sessions sounded really doom and gloom, but the fact is that most businesses don't actually fall foul of a lot of most of this stuff because they exercise common sense in what they do. But nevertheless, you can't assume common sense. You have to make sure that you've thought about these things in a reasonable amount of detail and bounced it off your team to make sure that they understand what the risks are and indeed how to mitigate them. And you're also talking about two types of risk assessment. Strategic risk, so from the bottom down, and the risk down at the coalface. What risks are your individual members of staff subject to, and how can those be mitigated? And you can do no better than to talk to those people as well, because they may have some really good ideas as to how to cut out some of the risks that they're involved in.
No, absolutely. Very valid point. Okay, Elliot, again, I'd like to thank you for the session today. It's been really useful. That is the final in the current series on risk, and we'll be back to you in hopefully short. Thanks very much. Bye.
Thank you.